Rik. Welcome to Leading in the Dark.
Thank you, Nick. Good to see you, or good to hear you.
I'm excited to talk to you. So you're the principal consultant of Nemanick Leadership Consulting. And
Yes.
the reason I'm excited to talk to you is you live in the world of teaching people leadership principles, and that's what these shows are all about. So tell us about your company now and the path that led you to where you are.
Yeah. So by training, I'm an organizational psychologist, and I started doing consulting around leadership when I was finishing graduate school. And so I've been doing it since 1997. And it's been a great journey working with a lot of great organizations that a lot of folks may have heard of. I can go through a long list, but it's been really gratifying to be able to work with so many leaders over the years and help people make leading easier and make leading better, because a lot of times the people I'm working with haven't had any specific education or training in leadership, and even if they do, part of what I do is try to help them then elevate their game. So that's kind of what I do, and I've been, like I said, doing it for a long time.
How has organizational psychology evolved over the time you've been doing it?
Actually, a question is, has organizational psychology evolved? And I think it's been a slow evolution. I think, it's something that, like a lot of areas of science don't iterate really rapidly, but slow evolution over time in terms of what we learn about leadership and what changes. I think the most interesting thing that we're dealing with, and as is everyone else, is just the role artificial intelligence plays in augmenting human interactions. Because a lot of what I deal with is, how do people set direction for other people? How do they provide feedback? How do they coach? How do they guide? And now you have this new entity of artificial intelligence sitting out there, and leaders are trying to make, well, what do I do with that? How do I incorporate that into what I'm doing? What does that change about the equation of how I work with people? So that's been kind of an interesting development. I went to a conference of IO psychologists earlier in the month, and a lot of the stuff we're talking about is, how does artificial intelligence impact the work we do as psychologists?
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Mhm.
Because that's not something I would have just assumed, maybe an example or.
Yeah, so I saw a lot of interesting sessions. The one that comes to mind is just the use of large language models, and it kind of is almost a Swiss Army knife of, how you can really automate some things, but also elevate some thinking around things. The applications I saw were, one, just using large language models to analyze troves of open-ended data from people. So if you think about employee engagement as an area where a lot of organizational psychologists practice, and you think about the work that goes into pulling data back, in terms of feedback from employees, usually we try to use, surveys with fixed responses to give us numeric data, but those are limited by the questions you can ask and what you think to ask in advance. And then you end up with all the open-ended comments, but it takes a lot of work to go through and analyze them. Now that you have artificial intelligence can get in there and rapidly pull out the themes, you have a lot more flexibility in how you approach engagement. And that's just one application that I thought was interesting. Another one was a psychologist who was working at Johnson and Johnson, who works in leadership development. He built a chatbot to allow leaders to practice giving feedback in different situations, and where the LLM plays the role of both the person receiving feedback and a person and a coach coaching the leader on how to do it better. So, you can play around with different ways to give people feedback and get feedback in a safe environment where you're not actually doing anything with someone, where you can find, how do I say this, or how do I bring this up, or if I say this particular way, how would someone react and how can I do it better? So those are just two applications I thought were really interesting in terms of, on the one hand, helping psychologists be more efficient at what we do. On the other hand, to supplement any kind of training we do around how to give feedback, to giving people a really interactive model to practice with.
That is really interesting. On the first example you gave, what does that look like in practice? So you somehow solicit some open-ended questions on engagement with your employee base, and then just put those answers into the large language model to pull out trends. Like, so you're just literally just putting in their responses that you either took notes on or maybe they typed them up and try to extract trends?
Well, so yeah, what one application would be, we put a big survey out to people, and then we pull back in their open-ended data, their free response, what are the things you like about working here, what are things that frustrate you, and then let the LLM do the content analysis. But what's more interesting is the ability to do sentiment analysis on emails, on people's messages on Teams or on Slack, where we can pull down a lot of discourse and say, what is the general tone and sense that the people have around how they're interacting with each other? So, you can do it from a more traditional, conventional sense of pulling, asking them to respond to survey questions. But the other side is we can also just see what do their conversations sound like and what is the sentiment and tone of those? Are there things that people are worrying about, complaining about that we really, need to pay attention to? And it makes it so that it can be a lot more dynamic in terms of paying attention and listening without waiting for, oh, we're not running that survey again for 6 months because people have been surveyed out. So now we have a period where we're not pulling data in from a more pull standpoint. This is more of a let's listen to what they're naturally saying.
So this interaction with AI, is this something you're actively engaged with clients on, trying to coach them through?
So that's the fun thing is I went to the conference to hear what people are experimenting with, and I'm still trying to figure out how would I incorporate something like that into my own practice. Because most of what I do is around one-on-one coaching and around mentoring programs. And so the application around the coaching is kind of difficult because a lot of it is just me talking to leaders one-on-one, and there's not a big role for AI to play there. But when I think about mentoring and mentoring programs, and I do pull in a lot of data, it might be interesting to use that to get a deeper dive into some of the comments people are making about their experiences with mentoring.
The example of using the AI model to practice feedback,
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because feedback has got to be one of the biggest topics that you're coaching people on. Is a lot of folks don't enjoy it.
Feedback, conflict, and delegation are like the three big topics that is almost on every leader's list of things they want to work on with coaching. But, how do I give feedback in a way that's motivating? How do I give feedback a way that's also redirecting so someone actually does something with it? And there's a lot of ways to do it, and a lot of ways, probably more ways to not do it. Either coming in too soft where the person really doesn't get the message, or so hard that the person not only gets the message, but now they're angry about it and don't want to listen to you.
So maybe a specific example, perhaps you have a sales team, an individual maybe isn't performing, hitting their numbers. How do you approach that conversation?
Well, I think part of it is I always ask leaders, what is your goal going into the conversation, right? And I think we kind of assume what the goal is, but kind of articulating. It's like, well, I want the person to turn things around. I want the person to move his or her numbers up. I want the person I'm coaching to take a different approach. And so, what is your goal? But then, giving the feedback. Really, I always tell them start with the outcomes that you're getting or not getting so that the person is aware of that. Because if you really just zero in on the behavior of what someone's doing or not doing, then they're going to get defensive and they're going to explain their behavior. But if you say, the sales numbers aren't looking good, or, if it's someone, in your legal department, it's like you're, handing a lot of work with errors in it, or, with an accountant, you're missing deadlines or you're making mistakes on your formulas and stuff. If you start going into the behavior, then people immediately get defensive and start explaining the million reasons why. So I always say, start with the result you're getting, which is the errors coming in are causing us to lose a lot of time. We're missing deadlines as a result, so that, we don't focus on the errors initially. That's just the thing I want you to correct, but I want to talk about the results so we can work backwards to what can you do differently in order to get a different result.
Would you separate feedback and motivation into two different activities, or would you tie them together?
Well, the way you deliver feedback can dial up or dial down motivation. If you do it in a way that feels, consequential. We need to get a different result here, but also supportive. And I think you can get a different result. Then that can increase motivation. But if you come in and saying you're not hitting your numbers, and if you don't hit your numbers, we're going to have to find someone else to do this job, then that can get to be, demotivating, because the person maybe doesn't feel supported, or, doesn't feel, that the boss really is understanding what's going on, or, helping me kind of get a different result.
It's a real tricky balance, isn't it? And this is probably the whole point of leadership,
Yeah.
because you have high expectations. The leader often probably thinks that whatever that expectation is so obvious. Why is there why is there any explanation needed here at all?
Yeah. No, you're right. And I think a lot of times leaders go in with the assumption that the person that they're managing and coaching is motivated the way that the leader is, sees things the same way, and a lot of times that's not the case. And you're like, well, you're thinking I would do things this way. Why are you not? And the answer is because that person is not you. That person has different skills, talents, interests, motivations, and as a leader, your job is to try to find out what those things are and create alignment as best you can.
That's a really good point. When you go into a client, do you use any specific tools to discover the individual's different motivations and communicate that as a team and try to get everybody to understand those differences?
Yeah, so there's two different approaches especially when I'm working one-on-one with a leader as a coach. I like to come in with some data, right? I want to get some data on the person, one, so I can get up to speed and understand who the person is, but also to give some feedback to the person to say, here's where your strengths are, here's where your liabilities might be, here's how other people might be seeing you, and bring it to the forefront in black and white, so we have something to respond to and work on. So that might be a 360-degree feedback instrument. There's a lot of them out there. I use a couple different ones, but that pulls feedback from a boss, peers, subordinates, to say, where is this person's most effective as a leader? Where is this person least effective? So that I can get some insight into how I might help, but also the person gets some insight into what they would like to, capitalize on in terms of strengths, and what potholes they may want to fill in terms of liabilities. I also work with a number of personality and motivation instruments in order to, if I don't have do a 360, to have the person fill that out and get some insights into, what is your personality like? What are your tendencies? How are you likely to show up or come across to other people? And, what does that say about, the core of your strengths and weaknesses? And then from a motivation standpoint is like, and what's motivating for you? What is something that's going to drive your behavior to, kind of inform your choices? And the more awareness you can have around that, the more awareness you have on what are your own motives, but also recognizing the different motives of different people.
I think everything you described is really important and valuable, especially for, senior leaders, of course, but, hopefully those opportunities can be flown throughout the organization. But I'm just curious, so once perhaps somebody in my role goes through that, would it not also be, really advisable to do something similar with their reports? Like, figure out like, this is what motivates your chief of staff or your VP of operations, so that I'm not guessing.
Right. So, a number of different ways I have tackled that. The biggest one is working with a whole leadership team and taking them through some kind of self-assessment together, where they're all getting feedback along the same, motivational model or a similar personality model, so they can understand themselves, and then they can understand other people and how other people are wired differently, how they might see the world differently, what their default settings, if you will, are, and what their motivations are. And so then, as the boss, you can then have that insight across them, but better, they can understand you better, and they can understand each other better. And so those are always fun sessions to do with leadership teams, because it's a lot of self-discovery, but it's a lot of recognizing and appreciating the fact that, oh, we are all different. We all see things differently. And that's actually a strength of our team.
What is the time commitment like? So a leadership team wants to do this. What does it look like to roll a program out?
I mean, It can really vary. I've done some of these in just a half day setting, and it has some impact, and people do get some insights. The more time people are willing to invest, the more the payback is, because you can go deeper on different things. You can really help people understand themselves better, but also have even better insight into other people. So in 4 hours, really kind of hard to accomplish all of that. But, if a team will go through something for a whole day, or, sometimes what we'll do is we'll do some things, or I like doing things in multiple sessions spread out over, several weeks or a month, so that people have time to pull in the information together, but then take time to reflect on it, on their own, and then start paying attention to themselves and the people around them and how they're operating in their normal work environment. And then when they come back to a follow-up session, it's like, all right, what did you observe about, yourself, about other people in the last, say, 2 weeks? What did you see? And then how does that deepen your understanding of yourself, of other people? And then now we can add to the next level of understanding to give you more perspective.
Do you have an example, of course, without naming names, of where you did one of these multi-week, maybe multi-month programs, and then you just saw a dramatic change as a result?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a credit union I did a leadership series with, and they had about 20, if I remember correctly, about 25 of the top leaders in the organization go through this program. And the CEO wasn't part of the program, but he did stop in on several of the sessions. And I still remember in the fourth session, there was one particular leader that apparently, he really wanted to see her improve how she was working, how she was relating to other people. And up until this point, she had been really resistant to any changes. And it was never her fault that things weren't happening. But in the fourth session, when I was doing a reflection exercise at the beginning, what I always like to do is start with, here's the stuff we covered last time. What have you learned? What have you done with it? And she put her hand up and kind of started sharing, these are some of the things based on our last session that really kind of impacted me and changed my thinking. And the CEO is hearing all this, and he was like, oh my gosh, you really, turned the corner just for her. And I think that really was eye-opening to him, let alone the other people in the room. I think, she was the one that he was most worried about. And the fact that she was able to turn a corner really was, I think, encouraging to him.
That's interesting. In particular, if I understood, the CEO did not participate in the program. Does that not present its own challenge?
Yes and no. So on the one hand, people always, say, hey, has my boss gone through this? Because he doesn't do any of the things you're telling me. And so I've experienced that. On the other hand, when you have a singular influence like a CEO in the room, it can really dampen people's ability to be honest and to surface things that they want to talk about. And there's some people who kind of feel like they have to perform for the most senior person in the room. And so instead of really, making themselves a little vulnerable and learning, they're performing for the CEO and not really, absorbing anything.
So would that be your recommendation, that if you deploy this to a leadership team, that the CEO does not be involved full time?
Yeah. So if I'm doing something, an engagement over time, well, here's what I do is I always tell the CEO, it's your choice. You can participate, and I would love to have you participate because you probably would benefit from learning these things too. But also, you need to be conscious of your presence in the room is going to drastically change the dynamics because of the power and influence you hold due to your position. And so if you do this, there may be times I ask you to step out or ask you to take a step back so that they can explore on their own. There was a leadership team at a big R&D organization I was working with, where I did ask the vice president of R&D to step out and let me just have 2 hours with just his team. And it was really interesting to see the dynamics that emerged when he left, and the personalities that came out. Because then when he came back in, you could really just see the shift back to, oh, he's back. Let me put on a show for him. Let me pretend I'm a really good leader and act in ways I think he would like me to act. as opposed to really exploring their own leadership and really reflecting on their own personalities and how they're showing up.
If you were doing individual coaching, with a leadership team that might include the CEO, do you do you coach the CEO differently than the other leaders? Because it is a very strange position, right? I mean, this is a silly example, but all of a sudden your jokes are funny, right? I mean, there's a lot of people react to you very differently.
Yes. Yeah, so in those situations, yeah, the CEO usually gets a little bit different approach to coaching, or maybe a little more hands-on, a little more observational time, and things like that, just because of the impact of the position, and because when you're the CEO, you don't have another peer CEO usually at the company where that you can kind of compare notes with, and so a lot of times as the coach, I'm a place for the person to really get some reflection, get some thoughts where not everyone, I'm as the coach, I'm not your subordinate. And, I don't think your jokes are that funny. And I think the funny ones are funny, but I'm not going to laugh at everything you say. So you probably get a bit more of an honest reflection and a little bit more of an honest conversation.
It is a very isolating role, and I'm a strong advocate of getting some feedback, whether it's a coaching session like yourself or peer groups. Do you also make that recommendation to CEOs? What type of support network do you recommend?
Yeah, I anything you can do where you can get together with other people, other CEOs or senior executives outside your company, outside of your echo chamber, is always beneficial. There's a lot of them out there. Vistage is one that comes to mind. I know a lot of people have participated in the Young Entrepreneurs Organization, YEO. There's a number of them where, yeah, you can go and get that kind of reflection from other folks in your same boat, and kind of a lot of times it's just the sense that, am I crazy? This is what's going on in my organization. Does that seem weird to you? And the other CEOs say, nope, I have the same thing. And go, okay, all right, good. So I'm not crazy. What do I do about that?
There's a quote that I really like, and I don't remember it exactly, but the gist of it is the key to a CEO's success is more weighted on their ability to control their own psyche than their own competence in business.
I don't know if I control your own psyche. Maybe that's a way to think about it, but I think it's just understanding your own psyche, understanding, where your motives are, understanding how your actions show up to other people and how it impacts other people. Because, like you said, when you ascend to that position, you can start saying and doing things and people are going to react differently than if you weren't their boss, right? And getting some insight into, I need to be a little more judicious with my words. I need to think through something, what I say or how I set direction for folks, because they're giving a lot of weight to my words, and I don't want to abuse that because that can get really old for them. And I also don't want to, inadvertently take us in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I always took the quote as, as the CEO, you know every problem that's going on in the business. And you're mostly dealing with problems all day long. That's kind of what you're doing. And I try to coach our leadership team is, you're dealing with all of these problems. Try not to let that overwhelm you. And so the point of that quote was, don't let the nature of your job overwhelm you, and then you start to manifest the negative side of everything that you're dealing with. And it's really the other quote that's a good one is, entrepreneurship is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. It's usually, where it ends, but the full quote is entrepreneurship is like eating glass and staring into the abyss and learning to like the taste of your own blood.
Wow,
There's something.
that's an interesting quote. I've not heard that one before, but I
Oh,
can totally. I've worked with a good number of entrepreneurs, and yeah, that tracks.
it's some famous Silicon Valley CEO that said it, 20 years ago or something.
Yeah.
But
Well, you
that's a
like the
good.
taste of your own blood. Ew.
Do you get involved in companies going through succession planning?
Yes, I have, and that is always an interesting challenge because it's a state of uncertainty for a lot of people in terms of. I mean, because sometimes it's when will the person want to retire or when step aside or whatnot, who's going to follow that person up, how to keep the motivation high of, a number of people who would like to be on the succession plan, would like to be the successor. And then, when the decision is made, recognizing that some of them may make the decision to go somewhere else then, when if not me, and how to work your way through that. Because how you handle the decisions, how you communicate, how you message can have a big impact on that. But also, just coming to the grips with, yeah, you have ambitious people. That's why you put them in the positions they have. And when, a door that they thought they could go through suddenly is closed for them, they're going to make different decisions because of their ambition and say that that's okay.
Do you get involved in the selection of potential successors?
Yeah. So depending on the position, there's often, I'll work with whoever is making the decision to do, leadership assessments on, the folks that they're considering, looking at where their tendencies are going to lie, how those are going to be a fit for the role, and giving that the leaders making the decision some feedback about that. I had that just a few months ago with the president of a business was trying to find a successor to lead the marketing organization and was looking at several candidates from within marketing to succeed the person who is retiring. And, is for them, it was really useful insight to understand the behavioral tendencies, the motivational differences of the people they were considering. And, hopefully what I provided gave them, an additional piece of data for them to consider.
I know it's a bit of an unfair broad question, but what are you looking for specifically in candidates that are being evaluated to move up to that next level? And, what are the traits that you're really trying to screen for?
So there's a number of them, and they kind of break into different buckets. There's the strategic leadership side, the thought leadership side, which is, what is your ability to, take in a lot of feedback and a lot of information flying at you about your business, about the market, about the position, how to formulate a vision and a direction for, and here's what we're going to do, and here's why we're going to do it, right? And here's why we exist as an organization. And then being able to communicate that within the organization in a meaningful way that gives people excited about the direction, gets people interested and on board with it. And so that's one lever I always look at, is your ability to kind of formulate that vision and communicate it. But then there's also the interpersonal skills of being able to, rally people around a vision. So just having a vision doesn't mean everyone's going to buy in. It's how do you engage folks, and how do you set direction and create motivation with them. And so there's the interpersonal side of it. There's a little bit of the self-management side. You talked earlier about, the understanding your own psyche. Some people really have low self-management skills and don't really pay attention to or realize the impact they are having on other people. And, what is your sense of self-awareness? What is your sense of self-management? And are you able to recognize that, hey, when I'm having a bad day, my tendency is to want to do these things, and man, that makes everyone else have a bad day. So how do I, recognize maybe I don't make those decisions or say those things until I'm in a better headspace? And just having that self-awareness and self-regulation, I think, is huge. So those are some of the things that I look for, in addition to just that kind of internal drive and motivation to want to accomplish things and to build something. Those are things that are kind of hard to put into someone, but definitely something you want to see that's already there.
How critical is somebody having that innate motivation?
It's pretty important to tap into that, because that is a source of energy and fuel to drive someone. And different people have different motivations. Most people, can tap into some level of motivation as long as there's alignment between what is motivating to me and what I'm being asked to do. But all the motivations may not be the same, right? So you might have someone in your business whose motives are in order to kind of create I'm trying to think of the way to say it, create a successful place for my employees to work where they can grow, they can feel valued. And someone else might say, that's great, but we also want to win, and we want to, beat the other businesses. And so those two different people have different bases of motivation, so they might approach it differently, but those become their fuel for driving their behavior to drive other people. And so the motivation, the bases of the motivation might be different, but the result can be channeled into creating an environment that other people want to perform in.
One that comes up a lot in the environment that I'm in is safety and security
Mm-hmm.
as a motivator.
Yeah. When you say safety and security, are you tell me more about that.
I believe it revolves around job security,
Gotcha.
stability,
Yeah.
boat not being rocked too much.
Right. Well, that is definitely a motive that a lot of folks have is I want a job that's going to help me support my lifestyle, that I don't have to sweat too much and worry too much about. I don't go to work every day wondering if I'm going to get fired.
Sure. We probably all feel that to some extent.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's one of those motives that it becomes like almost a base level motive that's not really sufficient to drive a business. That's sufficient to have a business, but you probably find yourself treading water a lot because you're kind of fighting a negative as opposed to striving toward a positive.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to summarize that one. Rik, I could ask you questions all day because this is endlessly fascinating to me. Perhaps a closing question. Is there a guiding leadership principle that you would like people to take away from this conversation?
A guiding leadership principle. I would say that, one, let me give you a couple. One is to know yourself and know what your motives are and know what your strengths are and have an appreciation that you are not perfect. You are not, going to be able to do everything, and you do need other people. And so once you have a good sense of yourself and where your strengths and your limitations are, then say, how do I help other people get some of the same recognition and some of the same self-awareness so that we can build something together? And if you can foster that both in yourself and other people, right, then hopefully you'll be able to surround yourself with people who are conscious of the impact they're having on others and can raise their own personal game, but also support and raise up other people.
That's a great summary. I hope you don't mind me saying, we have worked together and I found value in that. So if people want to contact you from listening to this discussion, how can people find you?
The easiest way is to look up mylastname.com, so Nemanick.com, and they can see the work I do around executive coaching, around mentoring programs, around leadership education. And then they can also go down to Washington University and sign up for one of my executive education courses. I love teaching those at the Olin School of Business.
That's great, Rik. I really appreciate your time today. I learned a lot.
Oh, great. Hey, Nick, it was great to catch up with you too.